Hey podcaster, I'm Tim Wahlberg, your podcast performance coach, with another actionable tip so you can sound like a pro and gain more podcast fans. Today's tip: don't make your listener feel stupid. I remember back in my radio days.
How old are you?
Shut up. Look, we're talking the 90s here. I had a PD in Port Hardy who also acted as the creative director, the traffic manager, and the head engineer. Of course, he was also the sales manager, and as such, decided to remove all 30s from the clock. He would only sell 60s from then on in, and he insisted that all the jocks would say the call letters live, so he could eliminate all produced imaging to save money on voice talent. It's crazy, right? I mean, could you imagine what that would sound like? Okay, does anybody know what the hell I'm talking about?
No. Yes?
Hey, that's awesome if you did, but I'm guessing a lot of you may not have. Did you feel a little left out of the conversation? I used a lot of insider radio terms that you may not know, like radio's traffic department, and I'm not talking about cars and trucks. Traffic in radio refers to how the commercials are scheduled. When you or your guest gloss over sayings or ideas that are obvious to you, you leave people out of the conversation. The next time you skim over abbreviations, acronyms, industry lingo, or terms, people are left guessing as to what you mean. It's not that different from missing a part of a movie. You then are left having to fill in the blanks or try to piece things together on your own. In podcasting, the worst part is that you might make your listener feel dumb or stupid. You may make them feel like your podcast is above their heads and that they need to find another one that speaks more their language. Now, I'm not saying you have to dumb down your podcast and explain every little thing that you talk about, but just have your listener in mind. Every once in a while, stop and explain those simple things that you consider basic. Here's one time that you can assume something. You know more than your listener. That's why they've pressed play on your podcast. Make sure they're being included by putting things in context for them. For me, the worst is when I hear a podcaster or a broadcaster use the words obviously, or of course, or everybody knows. Nothing is obvious. If it were, you wouldn't be talking about it. If I said to you, when it comes to podcasting, obviously you want to export your final mix down as an MP3. If you're new to podcasting, and we all were at one point, you may not instinctively know that you need to export as an MP3. It's a perfect time to say, using MP3s keeps the quality of your podcast, but uses far less space than WAV files. This allows you to upload more episodes to your host. When you stop and explain things along the way, you're being inclusive rather than exclusive. So, what do you do when your guest says something that might be over the head of your listener? Respond by using the full term in a sentence. For example, in your business podcast, "Oh, Dave, that's such a great point when it comes to ROI. But when you talk about return on investment, is there a standard ratio or percentage our listeners should expect?" And when your super nerdy guest on your Star Wars podcast brings up the Endor Holocaust, try this. Remind us again what the Endor Holocaust is.
Yes, of course, the Endor Holocaust. Everybody knows that's what happens when a huge space station, like the Death Star, explodes over a populated world. In this case, of course, we are talking about the forced moon.
No, it's not obvious. And not everybody knows this. And that's why I asked. Also, don't be afraid to ask your guest, what does that mean? Take one for the listener. Represent them, even if you know what your guest is talking about. But it's even better if you don't know what your guest is talking about. Because if you don't know what your guest is talking about, there's a good chance your listener won't. So be humble, be honest, be human. Your listener will feel more a part of the conversation and respect you more for asking. Now don't go beating yourself up over this. A lot of people use these sayings, including pros. Just keep it in mind. What you're really saying when you use phrases like of course and obviously is that everyone knows what I'm talking about except for big fat stupid dummies. Obviously. And I hope that's just the tip you need. Now, everyone knows that I do podcast coaching and critiques. Obviously, if you felt your podcast wasn't as good as it could be, you'd of course call me or book a session. So get on it. Clearly, you just navigate to my website, podcastperformancecoach.com. I'm Tim Wolbert. See ya!